As we've discussed many times at Swim Smooth, CSS-based intervals are a great way to help you improve your pacing at your threshold intensity. So once you've done your 400 metre and your 200 metre time trial and defined what your threshold pace is, you can set off down the pool utilising a beeper set per 25 metres, as this one is here. This is used for a swimmer swimming at 1 minute 40 per 100 metres. The beeper is set here in mode 1 to beep every 25 seconds. All the swimmer has to do is stay with the beeper per 25 to know that they're staying at threshold pace. Now, in many of our programs, we might ask you to do a slightly steadier session, focusing a little bit on endurance, where we'll say, okay, add 6 seconds per 100 metres to your threshold pace. So in this case, 140 per 100 would become 146 per 100 metres, or 26.50 on the beeper. Very simple stuff. Still staying with the beeper per 25. Now, one of our unpublished methods of coaching up until this point in time is what we've developed and called red mist sessions, utilising what we call red mist cycles. Now, if you're formerly used to using or training with a master swimming squad, the coach might have asked you to do something like 10 times 200 metres on 3 minutes, just turning around under 3 minutes and getting as much rest as you can from however far in front of 3 minutes you get. So let's say, for example, you do your 10 200 metres, hitting 2 minutes 40. In this case, you get 20 seconds rest between each one. So it's a little bit more open to your interpretation about what pace you're going to sustain for that. And we've been utilising this method in the squads over here in Perth for the last 4 years and getting some really good improvements from our swimmers, especially those swimmers interested in swimming distances of 1900 metres and above. So swimmers doing half Ironman, full Ironman, 5k, 10k in the open water, or even marathon swimmers. And the way we set the beeper here is slightly different. The beeper here is set into mode 2. Mode 2 is set here at 55 seconds per 50 metres. All the swimmer has to do here is stay ahead of the beeper per 50 metres, and however far they get over the cumulative distance of the interval, let's say it's a 400 metre swim, if they get 15 seconds ahead of the beeper, then 15 seconds rest is how much they get before the next interval starts. Very, very simple. Now, as you can probably appreciate, it's a lot less precise in terms of the pacing assistance that it gives you, but you will find that when you try this, it gives you a very different sort of motivation. Do you go off a lot harder to try and get more rest? Or do you back off the intensity a little bit, knowing that you've got a longer set? Because remember, these red mist cycles are typically used in our longer endurance type of sets. So do we back off the pace a little bit and just sacrifice for getting a little bit less rest? So let's have a little look at a breakdown. If you're used to using CSS intervals, you'll know that we encourage you to stay with the beeper. If you stay with the beeper, you know that you're doing precisely the set target time of, let's say, 140 per 100 if that's your threshold pace. We usually set the beeper in mode 1 and set per 25 metres. The nice thing about mode 1 on the tempo trainer is that it's precise to 1/100th of a second accuracy. So week in, week out, you can make your pace just a little bit faster, maybe 1/10 or 2/10 of a second per 25 faster. Such a small rate of improvement on a week-to-week basis won't be felt, but of course, cumulatively over 10 or 12 weeks, you'll start to make some really good inroads with your swimming. So we usually set that per 25 metres. We often express the recovery between these intervals as +1 beep. So in the case of that swimmer who had a 140 per 100 metre target time, or CSS pace, 1 beep recovery would be 25 seconds, because the interval is set 25 seconds per 25 metres. So take 25 seconds rest between each one. Or they could simply press the top button of the beeper after 15 seconds has elapsed, and that will reset the cycle to set off for the next interval. Very prescribed, very, very strict and very rigid. So this very exacting pace that's been determined is great if you want to know exactly what pace you're holding, but it can sometimes feel very rigid. Let's assume you're having a bit of a bad day. What do you start to feel like if you drop a little bit behind that beeper? Do you throw your toys out the pram and think, this is too much, I can't do it anymore, and jump out of the pool? Or do you suck it up, toughen up princess, as we say over here in Australia? Or do you find that rigidity just too awkward for you? Well, let's look at red mist cycles in just a second. But certainly, Using these CSS intervals, staying with the beeper, set per 25 meters, we can get some very, very good pacing feedback. And thinking back to my own days as a junior triathlete, this was something I was absolutely terrible at. And if I think about how much more improvement I could have made if I was doing the type of training that I'm doing now, when my pacing has really helped, even though my coaches at the time were telling me this, I just didn't realize it, or maybe I just wasn't listening to that advice at the time, naughty me. Good pacing really helps quite significantly. So, over onto the other side of the chart here, our red mist cycles. The beeper is set in mode 2, usually per 50 meters, and you have to try to beat the beeper. The recovery is totally determined by you. If you're having a good day and want to push on a little bit harder, you get a little bit more rest. But you need to be very, very careful, because many of these sessions are around about 3.5 to 5 Ks in length, just for the main set. So if you push too hard too soon, what invariably happens on your first couple of attempts of a red mist cycle session is that you'll start to blow up towards the end. So be careful. It's very much open to interpretation on the day. So rather than giving you an exact pace to try and hit, if you're having a bit of an off day, you should still make the turnaround times, no problem. But it's open to your interpretation. So certainly back off if you're not having such a good day. From that, you might find it's a little bit more motivating to be a little bit ahead of the beeper. But if you are a little bit gung-ho, like I used to be, you've got to be really careful about not going off too quick, because you don't get the same sort of rigid feedback as we do here. And this is where the two sessions come together, or the two modes. We get really good pacing feedback from the CSS intervals, and if you've already been doing that for the last few years, you really know how beneficial that is. You'll have learned how to naturally pace yourself much better, or you should have, such that when we use these red mist cycles, you can use what you've learnt in those CSS-based intervals to assist you with your pacing here. So by combining those two types of sessions in 1 week, so let's say a CSS interval session and a red mist cycle session, focus on threshold development, focus on endurance development, can really help to improve your swimming quite significantly.